Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel. I am excited about today's video because I am back to share with you guys 7 looks that I created using the new Anastasia Beverly Hills and Carli Bybel palette. I have to say it, I had so much fun playing with this palette. I almost always do. Anastasia Beverly Hills rarely disappoints me with their eyeshadow formulation and their color stories. I do wish they would slow things down a little bit. I miss the days when they came out with 1, maybe 2 palettes a year. I'm not going to get off on a soapbox about that today though. This is just all about this palette, my experience with it, and the 7 looks that I created using every single shade inside this palette. So here's how this video will go. I will show you guys the 7 looks that I created using every shade inside this palette, and then at the end I will share with you guys my thoughts and kind of my review on this palette. I've gotten to know this thing really well over the last week and a half, and I really feel like I'm in a place that I can really kind of share my thoughts on this thing, what I loved about it, and a couple of things that maybe I didn't love quite so much. Before we jump into those 7 looks, I want to welcome any of you that are newer to my channel. I hope that you will consider subscribing if you have not subscribed yet, and also make sure you ring that notification bell just so you know every time I upload a new video. One more thing to mention, I did recently post a first impressions video on this palette, and in that video I went through several of my other eyeshadow palettes in my collection and did some comparison swatches. So if you don't have this palette, be sure to check out that video for some alternatives to be inspired by. And with that out of the way, let's jump into look number 1. Alright you guys, I hope that you enjoyed those 7 looks. As always, I know that I say this every time, but I would love to know which of those looks was your favorite. Please let me know in the comments down below. And now let's talk a little bit about this palette. So I'm going to start off by telling you guys the things that I really love about this palette. First off, I love the formula of Anastasia eyeshadows. I almost never, in fact, I don't think I have ever been disappointed in her eyeshadow formula, at least with the ones that I have tried. It's always very consistent, it's easy to work with. Things I find build very quickly. I can create eye looks even more quickly than some of my other eyeshadow formulas that I love because they are so pigmented yet easy to blend and work with. I just find them really easy to use. These all blended out so easily, went on so quickly. I didn't even really have to build them up very much. You get instant color payoff, but it blends out like a dream, which is one of the things I love about her mattes. Another thing I loved about this palette was the selection of colors. I think this is a really great color story to work with. It's creative, it's unique, it's versatile, but it's also a little bit soft and feminine, and I think that's kind of unique for at least the palettes that I have in my collection from her. Even though you definitely get a little bit of color in here, really if you take out this red, everything else in here is pretty soft and pretty subtle, which I think makes it very universal and kind of user-friendly. I just think a lot of people would enjoy this color story. I don't think it's very intimidating. Even with the inclusion of these blues, these are very wearable blues. I'm wearing this color on my eye today, and I find it to be a more kind of dusty silvery blue than like an in-your-face kind of blue, which is going to be a little bit easier for the average person to pull off or to be comfortable in. Another thing I find about this palette is it definitely leans a little bit more on the cool side. You have a couple of warm tones in here. I think like these shades right here are warm, but other than that, I find everything else to be pretty cool toned in here. Even this bronze color is a little bit more kind of a cool tone, almost greenish bronze, which I think was kind of fun and interesting. So maybe if you're someone that didn't really like the soft glam because you felt that one was a little bit too warm toned for you, I feel like this one would be a little bit better suited for someone that maybe prefers their cool tones a little bit more. So I'm going to go through a couple of the shades in here that I found to be my favorites or standout shades to me that really impressed me. First off, this color right here, the color Bybel. Now this is definitely not a super unique shade. If you do own, I think it's the Soft Glam palette, the color Dusty Rose in there is basically almost an identical dupe to this color right here. But I love this type of a color for a transition shade, especially when you get kind of a more traditional warmer tone transition shade. I feel like those are really the only 2 transition shades that you would need to create either a cool tone or a more warm toned look. I found myself gravitating towards this shade in almost every look that I did. I wanted to use this shade in my transition. I had to remind myself that I also needed to use some of these other shades as well, but this is it's just a very versatile shade. I feel like this is the type of shade that you can put in your transition and put anything else with it, but it's also a great like all over the lid, buffed into the crease kind of shade. Maybe pop something brightening on the inner corner and you'd have like a really beautiful eye look just with that one shadow alone. Speaking of one shadow looks, I wanted to also mention this shade right here. This is the shade Libra, which is a beautiful kind of dusty purpley taupe. Now again, this is probably not the most unique shade in the world. I am pretty sure you can find the shade not just in some of her other palettes, but also just other palettes in general. I kind of feel like taupes have been missing from a lot of palettes lately, at least the ones that I've noticed popping up and that I've purchased. I kind of feel like after Modern Renaissance, this kind of warm trend happened, and all of the taupes and kind of silvery grays and browns just disappeared for a while. So I love seeing these kind of colors come back. I just think they're so beautiful and universally flattering. It reminded me of why I love a good taupe. One of my original favorite eyeshadow colors of all time is Satin Taupe by MAC, and that's one of those shadows and one of those types of shades I just haven't reached for a long time because I've just been on that warm toned train for so long. So I love kind of seeing these making a comeback. And of course, next to that, I have to mention this color, which is Jode or Jody. I'm not quite sure how to say that, but this blue right here, which is the color that I'm wearing on my lids today, is a perfectly done blue eyeshadow for the person that hates blue eyeshadow. I am definitely intimidated by blue eyeshadow for sure, but I find this to be a really easy wearable blue eyeshadow, and that's coming from someone that actually has blue eyes. And I do think that blue eyeshadow is much more difficult to pull off if you have blue eyes. But because this one leans a little bit more silver and almost a little bit purple, makes it a little bit more universal. So I feel like this is a blue that would look good on absolutely anybody, regardless of what your eye color is, what your skin tone is. It's a beautiful, beautiful shade. Another standout shade I want to mention is this one right here. This is the shade Moo. Now, if you watched my Jackie Aina video, you guys will know that I fell absolutely in love with the color Zam in that palette. And this kind of reminds me a little bit of Zam. In fact, I want to swatch those next to each other. I know I did this in my last video, but I just want to show you guys how they compare to each other. The color Moo, I think, is a little bit more of a champagne tone, where Zam is a little bit more kind of deeper and rosier. So here they are right here. This is the color Moo from Carli Bybel, and this is the color Zam from the Jackie Aina palette. Both of them are absolutely beautiful, but if you thought maybe Zam would have been improved even by being just a little bit more bright, a little bit more champagne tone, then you'll absolutely love Moo. This was another one of those colors I had to keep myself from using in every single look, because this is the type of shade that I want on my eyes basically every single day. I love a brightening champagne on my inner corner or on my inner lid, and this is definitely one that I feel like pairs well with any of the shades inside this palette, because it's not too warm, but it's also not cool. It's just kind of right there in the middle to where it goes with absolutely everything. Two more shades I want to mention. First off, this one right here. This is the shade Bowie, I believe. This shade really surprised me. When I first saw this palette, and even when I first opened this, when I got it, I thought, oh, I'm not sure that's going to be deep enough to use to smoke out my outer corner, to use as a liner. I just felt like it was maybe going to be a little bit too light in tone, but this is actually a really great color because it's not as intense and as rich and dark as a lot of her other browns that she includes in her palettes, but if you layer it just a little bit, you can get some pretty serious depth out of this, which I absolutely love. But on the flip side of that, it's not so deep that if you are not looking for a lot of drama, a lot of intensity, it gives you just that perfect amount of kind of soft depth, which I think goes with this softer color story. So very last shade I want to mention is this one right here. This is the shade Aura. Now, I don't think this is the most unique shade in the world. It's basically just a shimmery sort of more of a pink toned rose gold, but it was so beautiful on the lids. I loved this shade. I think it's so pretty. If I shift it to the side, I don't know if you can tell, but there's almost like a gray undertone to it, or a silvery undertone to it. It just gives it a little bit more of like a wearable, less kind of Barbie cotton candy pink, and a little bit more of like a soft feminine sort of pink tone. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed this one, because looking at it initially, I thought, you know, that's a shade I've seen before, and it's definitely something I've seen a lot of similar shades to this before, but it was one that I was surprised how much I really enjoyed how this looked on my eyes. So now I want to mention a couple of things that maybe I didn't love quite as much about this palette. Now I will say this, guys, I really enjoyed this palette. I definitely think this is one that I would recommend, but there are a few things that I didn't love as much. And the first one being the packaging. Again, this is totally a personal preference thing. I think some people this sort of very glitzy kind of packaging is really going to appeal to. It doesn't appeal to me as much. I like a little bit more kind of sleekly, minimalist kind of design packaging. But again, and I said this in my first video, this is not my palette, and it's definitely not a deal breaker for me. But I know there are a lot of people out there that is a big deal too, because when you're investing $45 in an eyeshadow palette, if you don't like the aesthetic of it, it might actually keep you from reaching for it as much as you might some of your other eyeshadow palettes. So it's definitely something to be considered. As for the shadows inside, there were just a couple of shades in here that I didn't 100% love. The first one being this one right here. This is the shade Bali. I'm actually wearing this color on my inner lid today, and I think it's a beautiful color. It's kind of a soft sort of champagne pink that has a bit of like a silver glittery reflect to it. It does have quite a bit of glitter in it. And I'm not someone that's opposed to glitter in my eyeshadows. A lot of times I like glitter in my eyeshadows and I don't usually have trouble with them giving me a lot of fallout. But for some reason this one gave me a lot of trouble and a lot of fallout. And despite my efforts to kind of clean things up, I have found that glitter has kind of transferred all over my face throughout the day. Now I know a lot of people out there will say, well, just use a glitter glue. I certainly could do that, but I'm just gonna say, you guys, I'm just too lazy to do something like that. If it's gonna be that much trouble to put on, I know that I just will end up not using it very much. Another one I wanna mention is this one right here. This is the shade OA. So there are a couple things about this one that I don't love so much. Number one being that this is another shade that has a lot of glitter in it. Now I will say this, the glitter in this one I actually didn't find to be as troublesome as far as fallout goes as this one was. It's one you have to be careful with. Again, it's one that if you are absolutely against that, you're probably going to want to use a glitter glue, and some of us just aren't up for going through the trouble of using a glitter glue. So just be aware of that. But the main thing I was somewhat disappointed in with that is how similar on the eyes it looked to the shade Jode or Jody. I just feel like these are way too similar to each other. I really wish that one of these would have been either a half a shade or a full shade darker, or a half to full shade lighter, just to give it a little bit more variety, a little bit more versatility, and almost even make these really good companion colors to each other. Because I kind of feel like with most looks you could use one or the other, and I feel like that's just a little bit wasteful, especially with one of the more unique shades that you're probably not going to reach for every single day. It feels like a bit of a wasted opportunity for me. But again, that's just my personal opinion. I do think it's a beautiful shade. I think both of them are beautiful. I just don't think both of them were necessary. So those things being said, is this a palette that I would recommend, stand behind? I would say absolutely yes. If the color story speaks to you, if you are really into these kind of softer, a little bit more cool toned kind of blues and purples and a little bit of those kind of rosy tones, I think that you'd really enjoy this palette. Her formula is always amazing, really easy to work with, and really other than this corner shade right here, I didn't have any difficulty with any of these shadows. So it really comes down to color story, what type of eye looks you like to create, what you're most comfortable in. This is definitely one of her more cool tone palettes that's not strictly neutral. I feel like Sultry was a cooler tone palette that was pretty much strictly neutral, other than that kind of salmon shade they threw in there. This one gives you a little bit more color, but it's soft, sort of wearable color. So I would recommend it. I think it's a great palette. I think if you are okay with the packaging, if you like the color story, I don't think you would be disappointed. Let me know what you guys think of this palette. I know a lot of you guys picked this up as well. I'd love to know your thoughts. Be sure to leave them down in the comments below. Hope that this was helpful for you guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, if you are not subscribed, I hope that you'll consider subscribing before you leave. And that is it for today. I hope that you guys have a fantastic day, and I will see all of you guys very soon in my next video. Bye. So now that the video is over, time to take off my poser watch, which has been stuck at 8 o'clock a.m. for 3 years. Okay, like a year and a half. And put back on my Apple Watch, you know. Gotta get credit for those steps. Anyone else out there have an Apple Watch and is obsessed with their steps? Raise your hand if you've ever done jumping jacks at 9:30 at night because you were 10 calories away from closing your move ring. Also raise your hand if you've ever found yourself thinking this: well, I might as well not work out today because my Apple Watch isn't charged, and if I'm not gonna get credit for it, why do it?